Welcome back to the Keep Smiling podcast. I'm Lara Becker, TEDx speaker, sports psychology academic, and advocate for eating disorder awareness and mental well-being. Inspired by my own experiences of overcoming mental health challenges, this podcast creates a space for open, honest, and empowering conversations about well-being, mindset, and personal development. Through solo episodes and discussions with guests, we aim to educate and uplift, sharing heartfelt insights, practical tools, and thought-provoking stories that spark curiosity, shift perspectives, and inspire growth. Hello everybody, welcome back to a very long-awaited episode of the Keep Smiling podcast. How are you doing? So, it's been a very long time since I have recorded an episode because I went backpacking through Southeast Asia for 6 months. I took a one-way ticket to Bangkok and I travelled all the way through Thailand, Laos, Cambodia, Vietnam, and I arrived back home in May. So it's been a whirlwind of adventures. I've had the most incredible time. And yeah, before I kicked off the conventional podcast episode type of things, I wanted to do a little reflective episode as to the little updates, the things that I learned across the travels, the experiences that I had, some epiphanies, and I suppose just looking back, showcasing some of the wonderful times that I had. It's really hard to condense the experience and the life-changing moments that I had. I went out with very little expectation. I hadn't planned a lot. I hadn't restricted myself to a rigid timeline and schedule. I went out with total spontaneity, openness, and kind of just faith in the unknown and just hoped that the universe would unfold wonderfully and magically, and it certainly did. With previous backpacking and solo travel endeavours, I've had to be a bit more restrictive and more structured and organised, having to organise accommodation ahead of time, transport activities. But when it comes to Asia, you've got to really surrender to spontaneity. You've got to really just say, hey, let's see how this goes and take it absolutely day by day, which was initially quite a difficult concept for me to wrap my head around, knowing that I was very type A, organised, meticulous, loving a bit of organisation and planning and scheduling and Excel spreadsheets. So going into this felt daunting and threatening and intimidating, albeit very exciting. But it was a world and a lifestyle that I was very much unfamiliar with. But that was the intention. That was the reason why I felt like this was an experience that I had to do. I was stuck in a routine of burnout, working myself way too hard, studying, working, training, almost stuck in a loop where, granted, it brought me a lot of value and I enjoyed it, but I realised that I wasn't living, that I wasn't experiencing life. I was just trying to tick boxes and maintain productivity consistently, and kind of stopped myself from just being a young 20-year-old woman and just exploring and experiencing and having a great time. So I completed my postgraduate dissertation ahead of time, and the day after I delivered my final lecture, I was straight to Gatwick Airport and I took that one-way ticket. And I won't lie, as soon as I landed in Bangkok, it was chaos. I mean, Bangkok is chaotic as itself, but I hadn't realised that I'd booked my first few nights accommodation very close to Chinatown. And if you know Bangkok, oh my goodness, that place can get phenomenally chaotic. So I had just embarked on a 12-hour flight to the opposite side of the world, to a place that I had very little knowledge of, where I knew nobody, and I stepped straight out into manicness. So needless to say, it did take a few days for me to adjust because I'd come from the comforts and the routines and the predictability of home to unfamiliarity, uncertainty. I didn't know who was there, what was there, and I transitioned from that comfort to the total unknown, which was exciting and anxiety-provoking and exhausting and draining and emotionally overwhelming all at once. But fortunately, as time went on, my confidence grew, I overcame challenges, I got into the backpacking etiquette, I was able to meet some incredible people, but that doesn't fail to say that those initial few days are genuinely you just wonder, why the hell are you doing this? Because you're navigating unfamiliar cities alone, dodgy night buses, language barriers, and you're feeling really isolated sometimes, whilst lugging 15 kilograms of your stuff on your back for months on end. But funny enough, it turns out to be one of the most incredible growth-provoking experiences of your life. And I'm fortunate to say that I've met so many incredible people. I've had so many wonderful opportunities, so many experiences that I did not think would be fathomable, from trekking in northern Thailand with tribes, participating in a Muay Thai training camp, swimming in the clearest seas in islands off of Cambodia that I've never previously heard of, teaching children in a rural school in Laos off of Vang Vieng, and doing the Ha Giang Loop in Vietnam, and, driving hundreds of thousands of kilometers at silly speeds in through the mountains under the blue skies. So I can confidently say that despite those initial anxieties, despite those initial hesitances and wanting to go home and feeling really scared and apprehensive and isolated, oh my goodness, it turned out to be one of the most incredible experiences. And I could very confidently give a podcast episode on each country, on each location with each country, because I think I did about 36 separate spots, backpacking through each one, taking overnight buses, hostels, proper roughing it. And I could probably do an episode on each, because every location had its own identity, characteristics, challenges, growths, and lessons in it. But just for the sake of listenability, I'm only going to mention a few of the lessons and a few of the experiences. The first, spontaneity, is absolutely magic. I alluded to that initially, and how I previously lived a life that was very predictable, routine orientated. I had my diary, I had my schedule. I had to learn to totally surrender to that, because some of the best moments from backpacking were never ever planned. The best days came from when you just went out and just embraced openness and spontaneity and just surrendered to how the universe will unfold the day. Very casually on multiple occasions, I bumped into so many wonderful backpackers in a cafe whilst eating food on a walking tour, and then we'd spend the rest of the day together, something that wasn't initially planned, and all of a sudden you've just had the most memorable experience. I also remember when I was watching sunset on Christmas Day in Koh Tao, I bumped into a lovely, lovely girl who I'm still in contact with, and she had recently come from a volunteering experience in Laos, where she was teaching the Lao children English lessons. And we had such a wonderful conversation, so much so that I felt very aligned with her values. I felt very aligned with her principles and perspectives. So I absolutely trusted this recommendation. And soon enough, a few weeks later, I actually went to that school in the middle of the mountains in Vang Vieng and spent 2 weeks volunteering, teaching the most wonderful children English. It wasn't just that relationship with the students, it was building relationships with all the other volunteers, having a base camp for 2 weeks, because, more so I'd been spending 3 to 4 nights somewhere and then moving on. But this was truly the opportunity to sink my teeth into a culture, into a community, and feel like I was given back, and I had a sense of meaning and purpose, and that was so, so wholesome. Similarly, when I was in Koh Samui, I had a lovely conversation with a guy from London who had come specifically for a Muay Thai training camp. We had lots of conversations about fitness, about travel, about training and martial arts, and he recommended that I did it. So I did, and a few weeks later, I attended a week's worth of Muay Thai training in Ao Nang, and again, the most incredible experience to be able to connect with all the trainers, learn more about the culture, learn more about Muay Thai, grow, develop skills, have a sense of routine, and be able to kind of push yourself in an area that is very unfamiliar and build relationships with all the other people that are partaking. That wasn't planned. I never had that on the agenda to go to this place, to attend this camp, to meet these people. But I was in a place where my calendar and schedule was so open and flexible that I was able to go like, heck yeah, I'm gonna give it a go. And oh my goodness, there are so many examples of this, like attending a meditation retreat in Pai in the middle of the mountains in northern Thailand, where I met monks, spent the mornings going on the alms walk and chanting and doing meditations alongside these incredible people and learning about the philosophy, spontaneously reconnecting with somebody that I met a few countries beforehand and deciding to, there were just so many wonderful things that came from just surrendering to the total unknown. Yeah, and it was just about embracing unpredictability, and control and structure was restrictive. And it's funny, I went from, going from a lifestyle very structured and organized to now being stressed if I had something organized or planned 2 days in advance, because my goodness, that's restricting me now. And who knows what's going to come around the corner. So that was something that was really quite poignant. Secondly, one of the most, I think, meaningful personal epiphany and revelation I had out there was how you are enough as you are. So when you're backpacking, when you're venturing through all these different cities, when you're traveling, when you're roughing it in hostels, when you're exploring and experiencing all these wonderful things, nobody asks for your degree results. Nobody asks for your LinkedIn status or the algorithm on your Instagram or how many endorsements you get or what result you got on that exam back in the day. No one gives a crap about those meaningless statistics. Rather, people care about your energy, about your smile, about your curiosity, your ability to be present, your laughter, if you're easy to listen to, if you're a good conversation. And I absolutely love that, because for so many years, I validated myself with titles, with expectations, with job roles, with status. But backpacking strips away all these layers that we wear in our everyday lives, all these cloaks, all these facades, the job titles, the social media personas, the pressure to be successful. You're no longer the student. You're no longer the keynote speaker, podcast host, business owner. You are just you. In that rawness, in that simplicity, when you realize that people still enjoy you as a person and respect you, it's so wonderful, because you realize that you don't have to prove yourself to somebody. You are totally enough as you are. And it was just a reminder again and again that, your value isn't tied to your accomplishments. It isn't tied to those statistics or those results or those things that we often clang so heavily to. Cling, clang, clung. You know what I mean? Rather, it's how you show up. It's how kind you are, your willingness to try, your ability to laugh if things go sideways, your authenticity, your ability to smile. That's what matters. You are enough just by being there, just by being you, and you didn't ever have to portray this inauthentic mask. And that was really quite transformative, because that's something that I'd been struggling for a while, is my worthiness, my value, always trying to prove myself, always trying to validate myself. But really, people just want you to be a nice person, and that's all that matters. And I suppose that kind of ties quite nicely with my next point, which is the power of people and how quickly strangers become close friends. And it happens in the most ordinary, gritty, chaotic places, like a cramped dorm room where you both arrive exhausted after overnight buses and immediately start bonding over how terrible the hostel is. Kyra, that's a shout out to you. We got to this hostel in Vang Vieng called Rooftoppers Backpackers, and it was so dire, so horrendous, that if you were by yourself, you'd want to cry and crawl into a hole. But because I was with her and we were signing in at the same time, we just shared the experience and we just laughed at how awful it was. And it turned into a wonderful friendship, and we're still in contact today. Or a roadside cafe where you're just sat on the tiniest of plastic stools with a few locals drinking iced coffee, and you sit down to next to somebody and you order a coffee that's like 90p, and by the second sip you're deep in conversation with the other backpacker, bonding over the fact that you've got the same Osprey 40-litre carry-on. You also make friends during hellish overnight bus rides, bonding over how kind of diabolical it is, where there is no AC, where you're sweating profusely, where the driver is honking relentlessly. The road feels like a roller coaster and you're so close by the cliff edges. But soon enough, you're sharing mango with the person sat next to you, complaining together, and suddenly you're trading life stories like you've been friends forever. And it's always because when you're traveling like this, living out of a backpack halfway around the world, you're at your most raw, you're at your most vulnerable, you're tired, you're disorientated, sometimes a little lost, but also you're more open than you've ever been. And it's reassuring when you see another solo backpacker specifically, because they're in the same place. No one's trying to impress, no one's pretending that they have all together. We're all a little bit stressed and apprehensive and not really sure what's going on. So when you meet another solo traveler that's in that similar predicament, there's this like unspoken connection. And you find your people and you click, and sometimes they aren't just fleeting, passing relationships. They actually become genuine friendships and they stay with you. I even decided to take an A5 little journal with me so I could get people to sign and write little notes and their autographs and where they're from everyone that I met. So I have pages and pages and pages of different handwriting, different languages, people talking about the experiences that we had. And these friendships, they were fast, but they weren't surface level, they were deep because they're built on this shared experience. You know, you're both having to navigate the same chaos. And because you're solo traveling, because you're meeting in a similar situation, there's a like-mindedness. And yeah, over time, I just found my people. And yeah, I'm just really lucky to say that some of them are so close now, hoping to reconnect in the future. There was just some really good eggs, really good conversations. And I can't help but smile when I think about it. Another realization. So as my travel experiences continued, I definitely got to learn my preference and my style and what brought me a lot more value and authentic joy. As much as the cities were cool and exciting, I didn't love the big metropolis areas and the chaos and kind of the oversaturation. I really, really valued the more rural areas, going deep into the community, actually having genuine experiences that weren't performative or inauthentic. I wanted to have those true, genuine insights and not feeling smothered by buildings and chaos and motorbikes. And because you're away from the cities and the saturation and kind of the areas that are sometimes overly westernized, you see a very different side of the world and of that country. And while spending time in these rural areas, from the Western standards, people appear to have nothing. You know, there's people living in shacks. There's no heating, there's no electricity. Their living situation isn't the most clean. Their clothing is too small and they have holes. You know, there's a lot of difficult situations that I've seen. And even some of the children that I was teaching have holes in their shoes. But despite this, it's these people who seem to have the least radiated the most joy. I'd be in these small villages, there's no Wi-Fi, there's no gadgets, there's no fancy appliances, just dirt roads, rice paddies, children playing on bikes, laughter, playfulness, football. It was when everything was stripped back to simplicity that you saw the most joy and happiness and infectious positivity. When I was in certain places, there'd be children running barefoot through the fields, playing with sticks and stones, completely absorbed in the moments. Neighbours would be gathering in one home to share family-style dinners all together. And there was just so much connection and so much rawness and so much authenticity. From an outside perspective, these people had the bare minimum. But they had each other, they had their land, they had their homes, and they had the present moment. And it was just so humbling to see, because you start simplifying everything in your mind. And it's such a contrast from the world that we come from and the tiny little details that we hyperfixate on. Because back at home, I know I'm not the only one of this, but you could feel lost in this endless checklist, like optimizing your schedule, building your personal brand, chasing productivity, being able to afford the nicest leggings, staying ahead of the algorithm. We wear stress like a badge of honor and measure our success in promotions and how many steps we've taken and how many Instagram likes we get. But these people don't have that because they don't need it, because it is truly unnecessary. And it just makes you think, well, why are we rushing towards these things and at what cost? And it just showed that with living with less stuff, with less noise, with less pressure, it actually showcased that you had more. There was more gratitude, more presence, more joy in the little things. It's just a big reminder that wealth and happiness isn't about accumulation. And I can hand on heart say that the happiest I was during that backpacking is when I was within those environments where it was the most simple, where I slept in a tent in the Mekong Delta with a family of coconut craftsmen. For dinner, they'd cook the fish that they caught from the water that day and the morning glory that they cut straight from the tree. And the laughter that we had afterwards just through conversation. And it was the most simple moments, the most wholesome moments where you're just having those conversations, you're feeling a part of the family. There's nothing material, there's nothing financial, there's nothing bougie about it. It's just real and raw. And yeah, those were the most wonderful experiences. And that's what life inevitably should be about. Another thing about backpacking, well, I guess specifically solo backpacking, is how much it teaches you to rely on yourself fully. And fortunately, I've always been very independent, very self-reliant. I like my own space. I like my own control. I've been single my whole life. I'm a pretty self-sufficient individual, I'd like to say. But when you're on the opposite side of the world and you literally have no one to really lean on, you really have to rely on yourself. And yeah, as much as you can call home, sometimes the time differences will mean that that individual can't pick up their phone, or you're stuck in the middle of nowhere and there's no reception, and you're really having to put your thinking cap on and be the level-headed person. Sometimes you want to have a panic attack, sometimes you want to cry, sometimes you want to break down, but you realize you can't because you're the only one holding yourself up. So when you're in that unfamiliar place, far away from home and nothing to fall back on, you have to figure it out. And at first, that was terrifying. There were some situations at the start of the backpacking trip where I felt so flustered and overwhelmed and just absolutely panicked about next steps, about uncertainty, about scary environments that felt really overstimulating. I couldn't break down. I couldn't cry. I couldn't lose it because I had to hold myself up. Because when you landed in a new country, you don't speak the language, you're not sure which bus to take, your SIM card doesn't activate, you're not sure how to get to your hostel or find your accommodation. You have to figure it out. You have to ask strangers, you have to improvise, book your own transport and navigate train stations by yourself, fix mistake, troubleshoot plans when they fall apart, and they will fall apart, reorganize transport because the island that you're supposed to be going to is practically flooded. And you have to cope on yourself. But every time you do, and every time you get through it, and every time you overcome it, you build a little more belief in yourself. And you realize that you can be a sufficient problem solver and decision maker. You trust that you are able to keep yourself safe, to get from point A to point B, to cross borders, to navigate those language barriers, to figure out the complexities of accommodation, of transportation, of fitting in the correct schedule, and figuring out the logistics of how you're going to navigate the next country. And that's when it clicks, because then you realize that you're more capable than you ever gave yourself credit for. Another thing was how universal a smile is. Despite language barriers, cultural barriers, not being able to kind of communicate in traditional forms, the one thing time and time again that came up was how the simplicity of a smile can get you so far. As long as you're warm, as long as you're happy, as long as you come across a kind, genuine person, people respect you and people reciprocate that warmth and that kindness and those gestures. I was staying in a homestay in Mai Chau, and the woman that was looking after me, we couldn't speak at all. We'd rely on Google Translate and smiles and nods. And for those 4 days, she made me huge breakfast trays of banana pancakes, and it was delectable. So the people from the fruit stand that I'd revisit multiple times, again, we couldn't speak the same language, but they knew that I loved their pineapple and watermelon, and I'd revisit time and time again. I stayed overnight in the Karen tribes, and we had the local people cook us the most incredible dinners, and we just smiled and nodded and showed our appreciation. And they loved the fact that we, were so grateful, and they kind of reciprocated that enthusiasm and were so kind and so generous and so warm and gave us little bracelets and pats on backs and just really invited us into their home. I remember I was fed by this wonderful old lady on the side of a road in Western Koh Samui, so it was kind of off the beaten track. She was just sat on the middle of the street with a load of pots of different fragrant dishes, and I had no idea what it was, but through pointing and smiling and gesturing and trying to hopefully point out the less spicy option, I had generally one of the most delicious dinners of my time in Thailand. And that just came from smiles and somebody kind of greeting me in because they saw that I was kind, they saw that I was warm, they saw that I respected them. And that happened everywhere. I remember the tiny little islands in Laos, there's a place called Don Det for the 4,000 islands, and this place is really quite small. Its circumference isn't even about 6 kilometers. And the amount of kind-hearted connections that I've made just from revisiting the same place for breakfast and lunches and, coffee stands, and just the smiles and the warmth and the generosity, it's just unbeatable. And there was even a time where I got invited to sit with the family and have a full-on dinner that they'd prepared. And this just came from smiling and kindness and just reminding ourselves that beneath all the differences, all the barriers, all the cultural differences, the countries, that we're all profoundly human. And it's just a reminder again of how that simple characteristic of kindness, of empathy, of genuineness, of a little smile can take you so far and humanizes everyone. Okay, and the final one is how growth lives just outside of your comfort zone, which I'm sure everyone's harping on again and again about, but that's the one thing that travel does teach you, that growth doesn't happen in comfort. It happens when you challenge yourself, when you say yes to that thing that scares you a little, when you do something that you've never done before, when you're booking a bus to somewhere that you can't even pronounce because something inside of you just says that you should go and you trust that recommendation that you got. And at first it's uncomfortable. You doubt yourself, you make mistakes, you get lost, literally and figuratively. You have moments where you break down, where you cry on the side of a road just wanting your home comforts and a hug from your parents. I remember in Chiang Rai, I fell down with some really bad illness. I'm still to this day not 100% sure what it was. I think it was just a combination of food poisoning, heat exhaustion, dehydration. It was so hot and I was so flustered and so overwhelmed. And it was towards my 2-month mark. So I think by that point, the fatigue and the exhaustion and kind of the want for home increases. And I felt so ill, and I've never felt so fragile and upset and vulnerable ever. And I was 24 and I felt like a 10-year-old because as soon as I called my dad and I saw his face, I just absolutely broke down because all I wanted to do was to call him. And I was looking at flights home and I was trying to think of how I could logistically get to an airport as quick as I could, just because the concept of going on felt unfathomable. I was broken. Like, I was so fragile. I was having panic attacks. I couldn't even walk to the bathroom because I was that ill and that dizzy. I couldn't even get my water refilled because I couldn't fathom leaving my room because I genuinely couldn't move. I felt so awful. But despite those experiences and despite those days where you just want to wrap up home and you just want to escape it all, over time, things start to change. You do develop that resilience. You do become more adaptable. You learn that you need to be more patient. You're able to get more creative with how you solve problems. You learn to stop panicking when things fall apart and instead embracing it, because things do break apart. And then over time, you'll know how to pivot. You'll know how to navigate those issues. And you grow because you learn to trust yourself. You realize that you're capable of so much more than what you thought you were previously. And the things that kind of overwhelmed you towards the first few weeks of traveling don't feel as scary. They feel more exciting. They feel like another challenge for you to overcome. And as time went on, I think I was more intentional with putting myself into those growth-provoking, uncertain, anxiety-provoking situations because I knew that I had kind of the backlog of tools to be able to navigate them. And yeah, there were scary moments and there were apprehensions, there was doubts and there was tears. There were situations I was in that made me feel uncomfortable. There were people that I met that kind of took advantage, and there were cities that were more overstimulating and demanding and draining. But equally, alongside pushing myself into those discomfort zones, I had the most incredible memories, the most incredible experiences by saying yes to doing that thing that ends up being, the highlight of my travel. It was just a big fat lesson in learning to embrace discomfort and just keeping all your legs and toes and fingers and limbs crossed that it will work out, because usually it does. So yeah, needless to say, the past 6 months were incredible. I had no expectation, really. I just went out hoping that it would be good. And it was fucking great. The people that I met, the random day trips I've had, the beautiful things that I saw, the conversations that I had, the spontaneous moments, it was just out of this world. I'll remember it for the rest of my life. I think it was the most meaningful thing I've done. And I was dreaming and romanticizing and researching for so many months and almost over a year, kind of wishing it to happen. One day I'll do this, one day I'll do it. And I did it. And I still can't quite believe it. Because now that I'm home, it's crazy how things snap very quickly back into reality. And yeah, I just had the most wonderful time, and it just feels like a dream now. I've been back for quite a few weeks, so I've definitely morphed back into the UK way of living, and reflecting back feels bizarre. I think I probably should have recorded this episode kind of more closely when I came back home, because talking about those experiences feel a little bit distant now almost, just because life since coming back from backpacking has been so quick and rapid and overwhelming. But yeah, if this doesn't inspire you to go traveling, oh my goodness, please go. Please go. Please go. Take a one-way ticket. Don't plan too much. Meet the most amazing people. Have the most amazing, spontaneous, incredible experiences. Have the most incredible food, the most incredible coffee. It's wonderful. And it's funny, my stepmom on the kitchen table when I was younger always used to talk about her experiences and her travels, and I always felt so in awe of everything that she mentioned and all the incredible things that she'd done and places she's travelled and where she'd gone skydiving and horseback riding and skiing. And now I've got some of those stories in my backlog, and I've got some weird and wonderful things that I can reiterate to my future children about, the Ha Giang Loop in Vietnam, riding for 4 days through the mountains on a bike, listening to music, weaving at silly speeds, where I went trekking in Sapa with Hmong tribe and stayed in the home for 3 days, how I found the most beautiful picturesque bungalow in Don Det, and I watched the sunrise on my own every morning and just swung on the hammock reading a book, how for Christmas I was on Koh Tao, where I had pad thai for my Christmas dinner and climbed up the most beautiful landscape to watch sunset all by myself. And how for New Year's I went to Khao Sok and I spent the night on the floating bungalows in this gorgeous national park, practically in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by mountains and water. How I went snorkeling on Koh Rong San Loem, an island off of Cambodia, cycling through the most beautiful French colonial influenced architecture in Luang Prabang, Laos, and seeing the most wonderful waterfalls, making friendships with bunk buddies and still being able to be in contact with them to this day. It was good. It was really bloody good. Consuming probably a unhealthy volume of coffee, because the coffee culture in Vietnam was that good that you couldn't just have one coconut coffee a day. And despite all of those really kind of high octane experiences like motorbike riding, trekking, kayaking, boat journeys, snorkeling adventures, some of actually the best moments were the no pressure days where you just need the time to recharge and you just find a little cafe, you'd go for a little read, you do some journaling. Like sometimes those were the nicest days where I just went out with my Uniqlo crossbody bag, which every other backpacker had, and I just found a little quiet spot with a gorgeous outlook, order myself a little coffee, and just sit and read and reflect. Because you can get really caught up in the travel and the what's next, and kind of always flustered and always distracted by experiences and people and activities. So sometimes just getting yourself into an authentic, adorable little cafe that you manage to find, that's often not even available to find on Google Maps, sat there with your journal for hours on end, trying to put all the details in so you never forget it when you reflect back and read back. Those sometimes were the most wholesome and rejuvenating and heartwarming. So yeah, it's not all about those wild adventures. It's sometimes just about those wholesome, quiet moments where you stay in your own thoughts, where you find a little quiet spot and you're watching sunset or sunrise and you've got a little coffee and a gorgeous view, just reading and writing and connecting truly with the present moment to feel grateful. And yeah, it was wonderful. It was absolutely wonderful. And there definitely was a temptation to go longer. I did have temptations to do Philippines or go to Australia on the way back. But I think by the time I would have maximized my Vietnamese visa, I was ready to go home. You know, I could have pushed it, I could have kept going, but I think I got to the point where, not necessarily drained, but I felt ready. And I'd had such an incredible experience in Vietnam, genuinely the best country in the whole entire world. And I had lots of back-to-back activities, from doing the Ha Giang Loop, doing the Sapa trekking, all the cities. It was such a busy time that I was ready to digest it all, to rest, to come back and leave it on an absolute high, because it was just incredible. And I was ready to come back home, carrying that gratitude, carrying that appreciation, leaving it on a high. I didn't just want to elongate the experience and potentially burn myself out. And I had to remind myself that Taiwan is still going to be there, Sri Lanka is still going to be there, the Philippines is always going to be there. I could always return to Australia at a later date. And also the amount of fridge magnets I'd collected just became slightly ridiculous, that I probably needed to come back home. Otherwise my backpack definitely would have gone over the weight limit. So, and I know now from that experience and all the other travel experiences that I have, that it's something that I value so much, and it's something that I take so much appreciation and value from, that I will always continue to travel. It's not just this one-off 6 months and then I'm going to embed myself into a corporate life of a 9-to-5 job for the rest of my life. It's something that I want to embed throughout. It's something that I want to do throughout. I have more countries I want to visit, more experiences I want to go to. There's a whole world out there, and I love travel. I love work. I love working towards a goal and pursuing something meaningful, but I love the adventure. I love the spontaneity. I love the experience. So it's definitely something that I'm going to bring along with me for sure. So yeah, that is me. I am officially back on UK soil. The transition back definitely came in its phases. I think at first it was so wonderful, so romantic, so gorgeous, because I'd landed and there were blue skies, it was warm. I revisited my favourite cafes, reconnected with my favourite people. I revisited the favourite places to go for a walk, Butte Park, running across the barrage, just the things that have always brought me so much joy whilst living in Cardiff. But obviously over time that novelty wears off, and that initial excitement and romanticising of being home kind of morphs into panic and adrenaline and apprehension, because you're now thinking, oh God, what do I actually do in life? Because I'd finished my degree, I'd not had a job lined up. So there was a lot of soul searching and apprehension and anxiety and panic about what's next. What is my future? What is my path? What is my purpose? What am I doing? Who am I? So there were difficult moments too, because for me, it wasn't just about transitioning back from full-time travel and the totally different culture and the totally different environment and way of living, but it was transitioning and coming back and not being a full-time student and not having that identity of being a student to give you that structure and the routine and predictability. I'm now an adult. I now don't have a degree to rely on. I now don't have semesters and assignments and dissertations. I am now in control. and I now need to figure out what to do next. Fortunately, there have been some positive developments, but before that, there were definitely lots of tears, lots of panic attacks, lots of tearful conversations to my dad. So it definitely has been a change. It definitely has been a challenge. It definitely has been a process, but things are starting to look up. Things are starting to look a little bit more positive and exciting, and I'm excited to see how the next step's going to evolve. But I also just want to remind myself to not get too sucked up in it all, and to remind myself of the lessons and the things that I learned about my value as to who I am, about embracing spontaneity, about embracing discomfort, about honest and genuine connections. The lessons that I learned from travel, I really want to make sure that I embed in my day-to-day life and don't just totally forget and disregard. So yeah, that is me. I'm going to leave you there because I could go on for absolute ever and ever, but I'm looking forward to get this podcast back up and running with no pressure, with no expectation, just a place for me to have wonderful conversations with wonderful people, learn a little bit, pick some brains, form connections, and hopefully make some slightly entertaining episodes for you guys to listen into. So thank you for tuning in. I hope that this will be a consistent thing now and I can actually be a little bit more reliable with my upload schedule now that I am back. I'd really appreciate it if you gave a 5-star review, just because, starting to rebuild this podcast and give it a little bit more time and energy. So that would be really appreciated. And I'll catch you in the next episode. Believe in your own strength and keep smiling. Bye.